Okay, let's start. Hi everyone, my name is Bini Gutmann. I'm the president of the European Union of Jewish Students. For those of you who don't know UGS is the umbrella organization of 36 Jewish student unions all over Europe and the democratic and peer-led representation of around 160,000 young Jews across Europe.
Hi everyone, I'm Natalie. I am a Jewish student studying in the University of Leeds in the UK. I'm excited to be here today to take part in asking the questions together with Bini.
And I'm also super excited to be here because today we have the honor to talk to Ilan Kohn, who's the director of HIAS Europe, and to Vasilis Kariasiotis, who's the director of HIAS Greece. And HIAS is a Jewish global humanitarian organization that is for many decades active across Europe and around the world to aid refugees, both Jewish and non-Jewish, and really, in my opinion, one of the most impressive Jewish organizations out there. But Ilan, why don't we start with you giving us a short overview of what HIAS does and what the new HIAS Europe office is doing in Brussels?
So you mentioned the HIAS to be around for a few decades. To be precise, that's actually 14 decades. Initially helping mostly European Jews fleeing pogroms and after the First World War, Second World War, helping the displaced Jewish communities, individuals. Over time, especially after the large migration flow from the former Soviet Union, and the number of Jews that actually are in need of our assistance was very limited. So we decided to shift the focus of our work, not so much to assist and rescue Jews that face persecution, but rather face anyone and that is escaping persecution, no matter who they are, not so much because they are Jewish, but because we are Jewish. And you asked also about HIAS Europe. So
yeah,
within Europe, we basically extend the work that we're doing in the United States and increasingly also in Canada and Latin America to work with Jewish communities around the issues of refugees. We also liaise closely with the European institutions to support our work internationally, and that's one example is represented here by Vasilis in Greece, but we have another 14 countries where we are operationally on the ground with all kinds of programming to protect refugees and to assist them.
And just before we move on, for those of you watching on Facebook Live, you have the chance to ask your questions to Vasilis and Ilan. Just comment them on Facebook and we will ask those questions at the end of this panel.
So just leading on from what Ilan said, Vasilis, maybe you'd like to explain a bit about the role of HIAS in Greece on the ground to aid refugees and asylum seekers.
Hello from Athens, Greece, and thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you, Ilan, for facilitating this event. Actually, I'm not a Jewish, but I'm very happy to lead HIAS Greece from April 2017 as HIAS country director. HIAS Greece has 2 offices in the island of Lesbos. We are running an operation of 10 employees. 5 of them are lawyers, and we are offering first-hand legal aid to refugees and asylum seekers, either detained or not, in all the stages of asylum procedure, first and second instance, litigation in criminal, administrative and civil courts. You can follow us on Twitter for updates. And also we have a supportive office, a satellite office in Athens. Me personally, I strongly believe that the real field of refugee law is now in the island of Lesbos. From 3 years now is in the island of Lesbos. HIAS Greece has started as a pilot in July 2016 with, as far as I remember, 3-4 people. Now we are 12, and our ambition is to expand maybe in another island also, in Samos. As I told you, HIAS intervention focuses in the field. We 3 years now, we have been involved in all major cases in the island of Lesbos, and by telling major case, I mean not only normal asylum cases like represent people in the asylum procedure, which is our core mandate, of course, but we are trying to follow up all the different aspects of this phenomenon. And in our interventions, we have realized that also criminalization takes place against the refugees and asylum seekers. And of course, as HIAS, we had the opportunity and also the obligation to respond to this kind of developments, worrying developments. I have to inform you, I'm obliged to inform you that a major hate crime case is now pending in criminal investigation, and HIAS, I think, reflecting also the Jewish values, is trying to support the victims, the Afghani families, victims of such attack. It was in July 2018, in April 2018, in the central square of Mytilene, this terrible attack against peace and quiet people in the 120, as far as I remember. This case now is pending in the criminal investigation. So what I'm trying to describe here is that our intervention is not anymore in refugee issues, but also in other dimensions of this phenomenon, clearly connected with democratic values and the rule of law in Greece. We are trying to enforce the Greek and European legislation, of course, and especially now, in this difficult period, I would like to stress out one very worrying development just before Corona virus emergency began in the whole planet. 1st of March 2020, 1 month ago, Greece has declared state of emergency, not constitutional one, invoking the Article 48 of Greek Constitution, but they announced in the Greek Ministry of Asylum and Migration, announced in the Greek, in the media and everywhere in European Union also, that Greece will not longer accept asylum applications for a limited period of 31 days till the end of March. And all the arrivals in this time period will be detained, pending deportation immediately without registration of their asylum claims. This obviously had no legal basis, but it affects the life of almost 2,000 people right now.
And Vasilis,
yes.
And how's the situation looking right now on the ground in the camps with Corona? Are there already cases in the camps?
Of Corona?
Yeah.
In Moria, not recorded yet, but in a camp near Athens, Malakasa, there are some cases already recorded, only in one camp right now. After 31 of March, Greece has restored the access to asylum, but in the meantime, the asylum service had been closed. So the same result is being achieved by this situation of Corona. At least the people who we have continuous arrival in Greece. Not every day, but as I told you, we had 2,000 people. We are expecting these people to be released from detention. But the whole situation in camps, despite the warnings of NGOs like HIAS and other NGOs, is really worrying. The population in Moria camp, which is the biggest in Europe, refugee camp, remains the same. We have 20,000 people in a place where hardly 4,000 people could survive. Still, obviously, they cannot practice social distancing, etc. We don't have recorded cases of coronavirus in Moria, but actually these people are not being examined. There are no doctors to examine all these people. So only some small teams of volunteers are trying to warn the people, to inform them about precautions, etc. But all this is based on volunteers. There is no state prevention for the cases to state information how to prevent.
In that case, if I've seen that on the mainland as well, there are some cases of
Yes.
coronavirus in the camps. And how is HIAS preparing to deal with the outbreak? Is there anything you're going to be able to do on the ground? How can you continue to provide services once coronavirus, there is an imminent outbreak?
As I told you, we had, as everyone, we had to adapt in this situation. We are trying to focus more on strategic litigation and advocacy efforts regarding the we are asking for transfers in the mainland. There are abandoned hotels. There are other types of interventions. Greek state has decided to release 20% of the Greek prisoners who had been detained on criminal grounds, of course, in order to prevent the exposure to the virus. So HIAS Greece has initiated with Human Rights Watch an open letter to the Greek Prime Minister warning them about, with statistical data about the dangers, and offering clear solutions to this difficult situation, because obviously we admit that this situation is unique. We are not telling, but every difficult situation needs obviously correct answer. Otherwise, there is danger for a death toll in the camps. The people are there are very vulnerable families in Moria still, even now. So more or less advocacy, because litigation is not applicable to these kind of cases. On the contrary, to the people who have been arrived in Greece and no reception and identification procedures are taking place according to the European directives. For them, the arrivals of March, we are trying to litigate and probably will reach also the European Court of Human Rights for them.
But I wanted to ask you one follow-up. And correct me if I'm wrong. As far as I know, there are currently 20,000 people in Moria, in a camp that was built for around 5,000 people, right?
Yeah.
Did the Greek government or the European Union or any other institution take any steps to warn people against Corona, to take any measures against the spread of Corona if it comes to this camp? Because I imagine there's no chance for people to engage in social distancing in a completely overcrowded camp.
Unfortunately, that's how they deal with this issue. It's hydrogen bomb, more or less. But the only clear solution is to try to evacuate some of these people, especially the vulnerable ones. As I told you, the Greek prisoners, the Greek citizens who are in prison, 20% of them will be released just because of this situation, and they are detained. These people are not detained in Moria. They are. This is reception center. Okay. Only the arrivals of March are being detained upon arrival. All the other people are their asylum claim is pending. Despite the warnings, and even before Corona, this situation was unacceptable. Now, you know, it seems that some of the Greek politicians believe that they could contain the virus in Moria, which is not, of course, the truth. You don't have to be a doctor to admit that. So honestly, this situation is a vicious cycle, and I don't know what kind of measures. If we are not undertaking preventive measures, then it will be very difficult to deal with this kind of situation.
And maybe one last question on Lesbos and on Moria itself. As far as we know, before Corona became an issue, there was already another big issue on Lesbos, being that there were big groups of far-right and neo-Nazi thugs running around the streets, chasing refugees, NGO workers.
Exactly.
And did you also experience that? And then what was the response to that also from the authorities in Greece?
Not really us as HIAS, but many of our fellow colleagues and NGOs are facing this, and we are trying to give them legal advice and to defend them in some of the cases. Because, as I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, HIAS Greece is not only an organization who we had to adapt in this situation since April 2018, after the first pogrom attack in the Sapphos Square of Mytilene against the refugees. This impunity in Lesbos Island is very dangerous for the integrity of society in general. So we are not as lawyers, maybe they don't attack us, but some volunteers, like the people who are trying to save lives in the shores, in the north shore of Lesbos, or people who are trying to help in Moria right now. These people are being attacked, and we are trying also to inform accordingly the police authorities, because obviously we believe in the rule of law as lawyers, and we are trying to enforce the legislation. As I told you, the criminal investigation from the first attack is now being progressed. So of course, many of the people, the extreme right groups that from Lesbos who have been involved in the first case, they are now responsible for the other cases. And also, even neo-Nazis from Germany are coming in Lesbos to help. So this situation is not easy, it's complicated.
So we've had our first question in from the audience. For those of you who joined us a bit late, you do have the opportunity to just comment a question below in the comments, and we'll be reading them out as they come through. So our first one, and we'll come to you, Ilan, first, if that's okay. HIAS, thank you for all your hard work on the ground and for advocating for the most vulnerable who are shamefully left by the EU community to struggle on their own. I think most of us agree that camps like Moria must be immediately evacuated and safe accommodation must be given to refugees. But how can this specifically happen? What's the timeline for it? And how can EU countries be pressured to accept their fair share of refugees? This is from Olaf.
Well, I think there's two questions here. One is in terms of solidarity between EU member states with regard to sharing the burden when it comes to receiving welcoming refugees. Another question is related to the public health aspects of locking people up on an island and to prevent also the spreading of the corona disease. And on the second part, I'm not very comfortable responding, and maybe Vasilis can relate to that. I mean, there are all kinds of aspects where that make refugees the most vulnerable of all populations. You know, one is dealing, and Vasilis is related to that, is of course the proximity in the camp. It deals with the almost near absence of health facilities. You know, you can talk about washing your hands and hygiene, but when you don't have enough water or you don't have enough soap, it becomes very difficult. When you don't have any privacy whatsoever, because right next to your tent there's another tent. So how can you talk about social distancing, all those kind of things? Then in terms of public policy, it's very difficult to also reach out and provide information to these particular groups, when in general, in terms of their emergency preparedness, governments have not taken these groups into account. They might not even speak the languages of these groups when it comes to spreading information. Yeah? And you don't see this only in Greece. You know, you see this in Israel when it comes to reaching out to the ultra-Orthodox communities or the Arab communities. And you have it in many other countries where minorities are not fully integrated in the public information efforts. When it comes to the spread of the disease and moving them from the island, I'm less comfortable responding to that question. When what is the best in terms of public health? When it comes to, and but maybe Vasilis can, and when it comes to sharing the burden, there have been many, you know, during 2015-16, during the height of the European refugee crisis, there have been many plans. How can we, as Europe, share the burden? You know? So one is the infamous relocation scheme, where based on certain criteria, I think initially there was a number 40,000 people were supposed to be spread to different countries based on population, based on their economic capacity, based on number of asylum seekers they have already in that country. And especially, you know, through that scheme, the EU member states were supposed to support those that were carrying the biggest burden, namely Greece and Italy. And that never happened, really. I mean, there's several states that were now being accused by the European Commission not to implement the joint decision or the decision of the European Union to share this burden, and particularly Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic are found in violation of that decision. You know, they've been either taking in zero asylum seekers from Greece and Italy, or almost maybe 20. So that's the with regard to the relocation and sharing the burden. And clearly, if we are wanting to address asylum and migration policy at the European level, when you have internal open borders, then you have to address many of these issues, not just at the national level, but also at the European level.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Of course, I fully agree with Ilan. I think this could be a European response to this kind of situation. But in the meantime, and if we see the Greek constitution, we are facing a health crisis right now. Despite the fact that Moria camp, Moria population should have been moved from the camp, at least a large number of this population. I remember when the camp had reached the population of 8,000, previous government was moving some thousands of people, and again it was like 4,000 and so on. This record of 20,000 before the corona has been unbelievable for most of us. If you go now in Moria, you will see not a camp, but a camp with a satellite camp, olive groves around. It's a small town, 20,000 people, okay, with shops, etc., like in Africa. Obviously, this was not the idea of reception centers, as described in Reception Conditions Directive. But when you face a public health issue like this, you have to respond critically. It's not anymore because I think the current government has the wrong impression that if Moria situation is bad, then this will be a push factor. Not if Moria conditions are better, this will be a pull factor. There is no time anymore for such kind of of assumptions. Like the correct decision for Greek prisoners, Moria evacuation should be almost immediate. Otherwise, every day counts right now. Yesterday, I think the Greek ministry has announced that the population is 5% less, but still we have this number. Also, all the new arrivals of March and April didn't go in Moria because, as I told you, the Greece had declared a special legislative act, like Emergency Act, denying the access to asylum of these people. So they didn't go in Moria. If you go now in Lesbos, you will see people living in empty beaches. These are the arrivals of the last days. The people are remaining in the north beaches of Lesbos. There are pictures, and it's totally unacceptable. These are like not hostages; they are left alone, without without anything.
And Vasilis, as you were saying, the Greece obviously can't deal with the numbers of people that are coming into the country, and it's really difficult. So how can EU countries be pressured to accept their fair share of refugees, especially today in such an unprecedented situation where borders are closing in a way we've never seen before in this generation with coronavirus? I guess also, Ilan, if you can answer this from a European perspective.
I'm optimistic because I think the coronavirus situation will end. But I'm very pessimistic about the next day because maybe this situation shows us that how interconnected is our society, our world, and the response must be totally different in the future. Ilan knows more about the current new pact on asylum and migration in the European Union. And even 3 years later, the European Court has decided that, of course, Czech Republic, Hungary, etc., had violated this decision. So I think if we want to respond accordingly, we need a truly common European asylum system, because with relocation scheme in the Dublin system and totally different approach. The rule of first arrival, first country of arrival is not anymore maybe applicable, because in fact, and maybe you have seen this in Austria, there are, even after the EU-Turkey agreement, after the after the closure of the Balkan route, there are still almost 30,000 people who had left Greece. So everybody, at least the decision makers, knows this kind. Greece cannot, even with the strictest policy, Greece cannot alone prevent all the secondary movements, etc. We need legal and safe routes for these people. Otherwise, I think the common asylum system will collapse totally, like Czech Republic.
Whatever is still left from that asylum system in Europe. And that actually to Ilan, like, do you think there is any steps that advocates can take right now to pressure EU more refugees in light of the corona epidemic? I mean, I saw just last week that Germany, for instance, is now flying in 40,000 people to help them harvest the harvest right now, which they cannot do because their guest workers are not allowed to come into the country. At the same time, there's 40,000 refugees in Greece right now that no one seems to be caring about. Do you think there's any movement possible on these issues?
No, at the moment, the coronavirus and health considerations basically trumps any other consideration, and I guess that's logical to some extent. The question is what happens once things settle down in terms of the extreme restrictions that we're facing at the moment. Because at the moment, even a simple measure like the relocation of just over 1,000 unaccompanied minors from Lesbos is not really moving, because of these corona-related considerations. So at the moment, to sell to the public opinion, okay, you need to accept X number of asylum seekers in order to reduce the pressure from Greece is a difficult sell, especially when you have populist politicians in a number of EU member states basically blaming the migrants for coronavirus, which is of course factually incorrect, and we as Jews, if anyone, should reject that kind of language.
Also blaming Jews, so I think
sometimes also blaming Jews, and so we just have to make the parallel what happened in the 14th century related to the Black Plague, and at least we have a little bit more science at the moment, so it's even less justifiable to make these kind of claims. So in terms of looking beyond Corona, I'm not necessarily optimistic, in the sense that the developments in the months before Corona crisis hit us, basically the policy initiatives were more restrictive rather than, very, becoming more liberal in terms of, so the focus is very much, and I expect that to continue to move a responsibility for controlling migration to the European neighbors, meaning our African neighbors, our Eastern European neighbors, as well as deterrence. Yeah? And deterrence includes making conditions in reception places like a hotspot, like in Greece, very poor. Yeah? So it doesn't attract, but it also includes, border patrols and shooting gas canisters to people that are getting from Turkey to Greece. It also includes the capacity building of the Libyan coast guards. All of these measures, they're explained as making sure that people won't try even to give money to smugglers for them to get on a boat and to try their way to Europe. But of course, it's part of a larger package of deterring people to come to Europe. In terms of what should be done, we should indeed like for example the collapse of the Turkey deal. We should keep long-term focus on assisting people. So if we don't want people to come here, at least we should provide assistance. Financial assistance, first of all, and to the hosts of those, for example, in Turkey, 4 million refugees are being hosted there for quite a number of years now. Yeah, so we cannot think, if like just respond to a crisis. Okay, we're blaming Erdogan for sending the people to our borders and sort of cynically manipulating this crisis at the cost of the refugees, and that's all true. But at the same time, Turkey has been hosting those people for years, 4 million of them, and in terms of shouldn't just be supporting the refugees involved, but them first and foremost, but also the communities that are hosting those refugees.
And Ilan, moving on from that, just because we're running out of time, would you like to talk a bit about what it means for HIAS to be a global refugee organization through a Jewish lens in today's context?
Sure, just a very, very short note. I mean, in terms of our answer, we also, like, HIAS is traditionally a resettlement organization, and we need to provide and build up capacity to provide a legal channel for refugees to come to Europe. Yeah, so they don't have to, risk their lives on the sea. Anyway,
can I add something here, Ilan, about the safe entry routes? We have also to admit the fact that not all the arrivals are refugees. Okay, we have mixed migration flows. The thing is that the whole European policy on migration and asylum, in fact, is focused only on asylum. There is no alternative migration route for those who are not genuine refugees. Okay, or if you see all the other directives, in fact, apart from the blue card for high-profiled migrants, there is no legal option to migrate. Also, the European Court of Human Rights plenary has decided 2 months ago about the case in the Ceuta against Spain. And the court, the judgment, clearly mentioned that even in these circumstances, the states should provide a way for safe legal entry in border checkpoints, etc. We don't have such a point in Greece. So the only option for anyone to arrive in European territories this dangerous illegal border crossing. And I have to tell you, because I'm working on migration since 2006, that all the legal migrants, refugees or legal migrants in Greece had at the very beginning a conviction for illegal entry. So we have to think seriously about alternative ways and safe ways.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Vasilis. To understand HIAS better, so Vasilis is the director of a country office that is focusing relatively quite a bit on legal protection, and that's indeed the bread and butter of HIAS to some extent. Having said that, we are today very much a global humanitarian organization. So many of our other programs focus much more on, for example, mental health programming, preventing and addressing gender-based violence, economic inclusion of refugees, in these type of programs as well. You asked me about what it means to address these issues through a Jewish lens.
Yeah.
So that's a very personal thing, and I think it depends it means different things for different people. Many of our supporters are, of course, American Jews, and over there, I think there's a broad consensus within the Jewish community about the need to welcome refugees. When it comes to the European context, I would say two things. I think me personally, driven then generally by certain values that I associate with Judaism. After all, the Torah commands us, over 36 times that we should treat strangers just as we should treat ourselves. From the perspective that we have always been migrants moving from between countries, and also unfortunately being the recipients of persecution, discrimination. So with that historical luggage, I would say many Jews, not all Jews, but me personally, have come to the conclusion that it's a personal responsibility to also assist other people that are fleeing persecution. I mean, in many cases, also in Europe, we don't have to go so far to in our families to see, where would we have been if, in my case, my grandparents wouldn't have been able to leave Germany for the Netherlands. Not a good destination, but anyway. So I think many people within the organization, the supporters, the staff, but we have many non-Jewish staff, especially in the field. They come to this work from and many of the activists, there are thousands of them that support us. They come to this issue from personal, historical, and value-based considerations.
And maybe as a follow-up on that, and as something that might be relevant for a lot of people watching, and it's certainly for me, because especially in Europe, and maybe also in the States, but especially in Europe, if you work with refugees, if you advocate for refugees in the Jewish context, you sometimes hear that they're a danger for the Jews, they will bring anti-Semitism and terrorism and what have you. So what do you tell people that confront you with those accusations?
You see, fear for migrants within the Jewish community seems to be very dominant, especially migrants who are coming from Muslim majority societies. We see this in the Fundamental Rights Agency surveys, the most recently in 2018. So you cannot really argue with those data. That doesn't mean that that this is necessarily reflected in hate crime data. For example, you don't see that recent refugees are behind anti-Semitic attacks. There's little or no evidence for that. so you do see issues with regard to anti-Semitic attitudes, also among second, third generation migrants in Europe. You know, and then there's the question, how can you deal with that? You know, certainly not by, you know, blaming inherent sort of opinion about Jews among Muslims. I think the best thing to do would be to engage them rather than build fences. Of course, we also have to protect ourselves. You know, I'm not saying that you don't have to have security in a synagogue or in a Jewish community center, but you should definitely open yourself up to meet the refugees themselves. When there's refugees and asylum seekers being spread geographically, and they might also come to your neighborhood, instead of immediately shouting that this is a danger to the Jewish community, maybe you should do an effort, make an effort to engage with them and see who these people are.
Absolutely, no. I mean, that's also the experience that I have made. There's a Jewish refugee organization in Vienna, one that actually HIAS works with. And I really think that, yes, it might be true that some refugees come with anti-Semitic attitudes to Europe, but when they then actually meet Jews in real life for the first time, and those Jews are completely different than they were told, and this is actually the best antidote to anti-Semitic and to anti-Semitism that they might have grown up with. So actually, I think working with refugees, working on integration, being open, is also the answer to that from at least my experience. But let's maybe move on to the Q&A part, because we have lots of questions and very little time.
Yeah, I'll bring the first question. It says, specifically in Greece, I am wondering how HIAS coordinates with the myriad of other NGOs that work in places like Lesbos. What unique value can it bring? For example, legal services.
HIAS is the chair of the ad hoc legal working group of all the organizations who are offering legal aid in the island of Lesbos. And we are trying to coordinate common efforts like press releases, advocacy papers, etc. And also, if we think that a case is more strategic one, we are trying to collaborate with these colleagues in order to enhance our effectiveness in the field.
I'm gonna ask the next two questions together because they're both legal questions and both to Vasilis. The first one is, how has HIAS worked with against the new Greek refugee and asylum law that went into effect in January? Is that part of HIAS's work? And then the second question is, what are key legal parameters for right of asylum in Greece? Is it better to be a refugee to land in other EU member states or in Greece?
Is it possible to repeat the first question?
Absolutely. The first question is about the new Greek asylum law that was passed in January, and whether that is something that you advocate for or against, and what your opinion is on that.
Thank you for this question. We are trying to brainstorm, first of all, how to better deal with this limitation of asylum seeker rights, because the Greek law, and there is another one coming the next days, violates and doesn't really implement properly the European directives. So we have tried to exhaust domestic measures. We are expecting some decisions, and we are exploring the possibility to find the right applicant in order to proceed in the European Court of Human Rights. Most of my colleagues are experts also in European Court of Human Rights. We have dealt some detention cases in the past and other type of cases for migrant rights. So probably these kind of provisions will be tested in European Court. And is it possible to repeat the second question?
Yeah, the second question was basically whether it is legally better for refugees to land in Greece or in other EU countries when it comes to asylum law.
For reception, this is a very tricky question, but I think for reception conditions, Greece is not very good, especially now. But as far as it concerns the asylum procedure per se and the recognition rate, I think Greece, after the MSS versus Belgium and Greece judgment, has reached a level of fair and effective asylum procedure, despite the delays. Everyone who, especially after 2013, with the creation of the independent Greek Asylum Service, the recognition rate is according to the European standards, and anyone who is genuine refugee could be recognized as such. The problem in Greece is the reception and the reception conditions, not the asylum procedure.
Thank you. So the next question is also for Vasilis. Since you are working on the ground in Greece, I was wondering, what is your opinion on the Dublin Agreement? How does it affect the role of the EU in giving refugees a safe shelter? And what should specifically be changed in order to improve the situation?
The Dublin system could do better, in my opinion. In the last amendment, I think European Union member states should agree that the strict rule of first country of arrival, not only de facto, not only de jure is not fair, but de facto has been, let's say, not respected by the European, not by Greece only, by all the member states. As I told you, there are, even after March 2016, there are 30,000 people, Greece, who have passed Greece, and they are now in Vienna, maybe. Greece should, I think it's time to close the MSS execution in the Committee of Ministers of European of the Council of Europe, because Greece has done a lot in order to create a fair and efficient asylum system. The relocation scheme could be also a permanent mechanism in future Dublin, and maybe if someone is recognized in Greece, maybe we should think how, because according to the current standards, only a recognized refugee who could also obtain the long-term residence status could travel in other countries. Maybe we should start thinking about a European right to free movement also for recognized refugees. But I suppose this will be the next pack on European and migration currently pending in European Commission. Also, I strongly believe that other type of legal migration should be immediately implemented, because these 14 years I'm working with refugees and migrants, I have seen that at the end of the day, many people are obliged to use the asylum system because there is no alternative, especially in Greece, and I suppose in other countries also. Especially after 2008, when the European Commission has in fact restricted all the immunities and regularization scheme in whole European Union. Maybe this is not anymore. I think there is a large number of undocumented migrants in European Union who cannot be removed right now. So we have to deal also with this kind of issue. It's not only Dublin. Even the perfect Dublin could not solve the problem. We have to think creatively in other aspects also.
Thank you. And then the final question, which is open to both of you. Ilan, maybe you want to start. What do you think about the role of Frontex and the increasing militarization of the Greek-Turkish border? Is this sustainable? Will the corona crisis only deepen the sense of Fortress Europe?
Ilan.
Sorry. One thing that maybe needs to be explained, Vasily several times referred to migration asylum or migration pact of the European Commission. So you should understand that under the previous Commission, quite considerable progress was made on many other aspects of migration other than asylum, including what you mentioned, and an external border control, Frontex. But not so much on asylum. And now there's, just before Corona started, there was a new momentum within the European Commission, with the new Commission coming in with a whole new set of proposals for migration and asylum policy reform. A lot of us think this might not go necessarily in the right direction, but it includes also a further. We don't know exactly, but it probably would include, a border procedure, etc. And well, I'm not saying we should have, no border control or, open borders, but you cannot, have exclusive focus on the security dimension of migration when you don't have also proper legal channels for migrants, including for asylum seekers and refugees. So and these channels include being able to apply for refugee status, maybe externally or at the border, and resettlement. There's everyone knows that not only will there continue to be a massive pressure in terms of asylum seekers coming to Europe, also because of environmental changes, global warming, but also because of conflict and scarce resources. So that is likely not just to continue, but likely to increase over the years. And in addition, there's an economic argument to be made for migration. I'm not saying for refugees to come to Europe, but there's a need, as Bini just referenced now, under the Corona conditions, for workers to just work on the fields in Germany. So that's an ongoing thing in many sectors of the economy. So there have to be different schemes of migration, legal schemes, in addition to just securitizing migration and focusing on the external dimension. The border, which has to be there as well.
Thank you very much. I think this concludes our panel. Thanks a lot, Natalie, for moderating. And thanks a lot, Ilan and Vasilis, for all that you do. It's really impressive. Really thanks a lot from the bottom of our heart. And please continue the good work and stay healthy and stay safe. And obviously, Pesach is coming up now. By the way, HIAS has a very interesting Haggadah that I really urge you to check out, which is a really interesting project that HIAS has done. But also, as Pesach is coming up, and as we are celebrating the journey of the Jewish people from persecution and into freedom, we should keep in mind that not all people have yet left persecution and slavery, and not all people have left the personal Egypt yet. And that as we celebrate Pesach, even in these hard times, I think we should keep those people in mind and do everything that we can to actually make sure that at some point there is no need for an organization like HIAS anymore, and that actually all people will leave their personal Egypt and will be finally free. On this note, stay healthy, stay safe, and most importantly, stay home.
Thank you very much, Bini. Well said. There is also a French translation of Tagada. If anyone wants it, we're happy to share it. And it's online available also.
Thank you. You can follow us also on HIAS Greece Twitter for recent updates. And also, you are very welcome in Lesbos, but maybe after this virus situation, maybe in summer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And also obviously follow UGS on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and everywhere else, soon on TikTok. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.